Welcome back. You're still watching Today, and our big discussion centers around Nandipha Magudumana. We do have a Senior Reporter Silindelo Masikane, Tanya Steyn, who's a body and language expert. We've got a legal expert from the UJ Law Clinic, Elton Hart, and of course a Professor Saths Cooper, who's a psychologist. All of them joining me in studio. Slee, let's pick up with you just to give our viewers a bit of context as to why it is that she's only applying for bail at this stage in her court battle. We do know what happened previously when we had a sitting in court, a hearing, a fight of whether it was a deportation or an extradition, and now we find ourselves at this stage where the rest of the co-accused have done and dusted that process and shown embarks on it now.
Well, one could only really bring it to the fact that her processes in the higher courts are not going, I think, as quickly as perhaps she anticipated. Because remember, she approached the Free State High Court saying that she wants her arrest and deportation from Tanzania to be declared unlawful and set aside. And in essence, she was asking the High Court to allow her to walk out of jail a free woman. That process in the High Court has been dismissed with costs on 2 occasions. Her initial application on an urgent basis was dismissed, and she appealed once again. That was also dismissed. But what was interesting in those applications was the fact that the judge did find that her deportation was a disguised extradition.
Yeah.
So I think that's why she is now approaching the Supreme Court of Appeal, where she has filed her papers and is approaching the SCA directly to say that there is a fact-finding, or there's a constitutional issue with how she was brought back to South Africa. But now with this bail application, which is what's having social media abuzz, is the fact that she's now claiming that Thabo Bester is the one who took her out of South Africa against her will. She's also now saying to the SCA that the South African state officials also brought her back into the country against her will.
Yeah.
So the question is then, which is it? Were you kidnapped by Bester, or were you kidnapped by the SAPS? So she seems to be making 2 different arguments in her bail application as well as the papers she's filed in the SCA, which I think is going to be quite interesting. And I think Mr. Hart can unpack this more for us in terms of, has she jeopardized her chances in the higher courts in terms of what she's looking for, seeking for there, and what she's saying now about how Bester, in essence, took her out of South Africa against her will. So the reason why we're only seeing her applying for bail now is that we saw her legal team basically implementing a different strategy, I guess.
Yeah.
And instead of applying for bail, we're trying to get her off the hook by approaching the higher courts. But they're now back to the bail application, of course.
It's very confusing, Elton, and it's an opportune time for you to get in here because, as Slee has indicated, there are 2 contradictory arguments that have been put forward now. And when you weigh in on that and the particular issue that the Prof mentioned before the ad break, that she's definitely a flight risk, how on earth does her legal team navigate what one would assume is a big mess that's been created, but also that she could potentially be a flight risk?
Now, if one looks at it, here's 2 issues, and it's very easy that we distort the lines. The one where she's applying for bail, she says, I was taken out of the country illegally so. And I was taken to wherever we were found in Tanzania. But when I was in Tanzania, I was brought back illegally to this country. Maybe, and we don't know, she thought maybe I want to go to Dubai from Tanzania to get away from Thabo Bester. And I'm not saying that, I'm just saying she could have chosen to go to Dubai, not come to South Africa, because at the stage when all these things happened, there was not yet a J50 warrant out for her arrest. They were still in the process. I think the J50 was sort of half issued at the later stage when she was now already out of the country. So she couldn't have known there was a warrant out for her. So she's bringing it on that front. And what they are doing, it was very well and carefully planned and crafted, what the legal advice that was given to her by the immigration lawyers and everybody that assisted her. Say, bring the application to declare your extradition/deportation first unlawful. And now the High Court stepped into that trap to actually make that finding, to say this deportation that they say was a deportation was a disguised extradition. So they've got that in the bag. There was a fact-finding made. Now I can actually bring my bail application now, because maybe the SCA might say, whilst you were waiting for us to come and actually deal with this thing, what did you do in the interim to mitigate your damages, if one can put it in that way? So they said, no, I applied for bail, and they even denied me bail. So I think this thing was very carefully planned, and we should not distort deadlines. Yes, these things emanate from one or a set of events that goes like one coming back the other, but we should not tremble upon the lines. It's a bail application here, and there was a extradition stroke deportation that should be kept apart. And now with the issue of being a flight risk, yes, the state said she left the country 23 times. Now, I think the state was not supposed to do that. The state was supposed to leave it and let her now prove beyond doubt that she's not a flight risk. Now, the state showed there, and it's now on the record, that she went in and out of the country while these things, that 11 months of planning and plotting these crimes was happening. And she knew all the risks, because this is an intelligent woman. She knew all the risks involved in her doing these things. And she went 23 times up and down between the countries, wherever she went. She came back. So this is her point of reference. So maybe they gave the defense something to latch on to say that maybe she will stay in the trial, because she knew she could face long jail sentences, but she came back still to actually finalize the big grand escape. So that's how, but we should not distort the bail from or with the extradition hearing or deportation hearing. We should keep them apart and say, look at this. And hence I said at the beginning, bail should not be seen as a punitive measure. Yes, people wanted to be kept in jail, but she's got a constitutional right to apply for bail like any other person who has committed a range of crimes. And that's now the sad part, because of how our Constitution is written and how our Criminal Procedure Act is written.
Yeah. Tanya, it's very interesting, because you called it in our last discussion that there is a chance that she might turn on Bester based on the body language analysis that you had done of her previously when they got together. Are we seeing that playing out now? We spoke about the tears, and we spoke about her demeanor in court, her distancing herself from all the arguments that were being put forward by the state. Is this exactly what's happening, where she is now officially now turning on Thabo Bester?
Well, it's just, I could see something was up with her body language the first time they were together. She was distancing way too much. She was called in way too much. So something was up. What she's doing now, she's using a lot of head tilts. So head tilts is showing submissiveness or vulnerability, because we're opening up our main vein here. And it's also a flirting technique. So she often, when she speaks to men, she flirts. She's a very good flirt. I mean, her body language is amazing. If we really want to learn how to flirt, we should watch her. Because she does. She does the submissiveness. When we show the ear like this, we tend to show, I'm listening, I'm interested in you. This is a thing she does all the time. She overdid it. She overdid the head shake, the no, it was overdone. You know, so she's playing at being an innocent person with this body language. You know, she's displaying, look at me, I'm innocent. And I think she's used it in her life to get what she wanted, and now she's using it again. But like I said, I think she's overdoing her whole display. The crying was fake. She was crying. She was sad for herself at some stages, because we could see the facial expression. With body language, we look for, it's your facial expression, it's your gestures, it's your posture, it's your tone of voice. And body language is really just an external display of an internal emotion. And it usually happens unconsciously, so we're not always aware that we're doing these things. It's like she was leaving the tears to drip down her face. I mean, that's not normal behavior for a person who's really crying. We don't want to show people we're crying. They can see we're crying. But when we leave the tears to drip, we want the world to see, look at me, I'm really sad. I'm sorry. When she walked into court, she had her head bowed. She often looks down. That's submissiveness. It's to show guilt or shame. You know, when we put our heads down. I do understand what the prof's saying. I don't think she has those emotions, really. The emotions doesn't seem real. I was watching the woman in court, the other woman in court as well, and I could see the women don't believe her at all, but the men believe her. You know, she's very good at what she does.
Yeah, I mean, Prof, let's bring you in there. I mean, with that, someone as smart as Nandipha Magudumana, with her education and so, do you think that she's aware that she's overplayed the sympathy card? Or like Tanya has indicated there, the men are likely to still believe whatever it is that she's portraying via her body language?
Okay, I think let's start with her legal team. I don't know if there's any female in her legal team, but I think she's taken her, the advice of her legal team, or there's been a strategy on how to deal with the proceedings between herself and her lover. Whatever that relationship is, we know they were together. So they miscalculated because they went for the constitutional challenge. I think they should have gone for the bail first, because the others got bail, except for Bester and the foreigner, right? Because you can't grant Bester bail. I don't think he even applied for bail because he's a convicted criminal. And the others got their bail, so there's a miscalculation. And whatever they did has turned on them, and the contradictions are going to be apparent for any wise presiding officer. This woman, yes, is capable of emotion. She can show that emotion, but for an ulterior, self-serving purpose, not for anything else. Yeah. She is besotted with this guy. This guy has a hold on her. However they met and whatever they've done it together up to now. She has to now ditch him because he's in jail and she needs to get out. So this is the approach, I think, that they're adopting between themselves. I think the courts are mature enough to see through this kind of thing. Let's get a quick trial and get this thing over with so that we can get on with our lives and not be affected by this Thabo and Nandipha love story that is now turning on itself.
No, it absolutely is turning on itself. And of course, there are many other nuances for us to unpack. And we'll do that as soon as we return from this short break. Our discussion continues straight after the short commercial break. Welcome back. You're still tuned in today, and of course we are discussing what's now been dubbed the Magudumania. And in studio we've got Silindelo Masikane, who's been covering the story, Tanya Steyn, who's a body and language expert. You've got legal expert Elton Hart, and of course Professor Saths Cooper, who is a psychologist. Elton, before we move on to other issues in this case, I just want us to round up what we were discussing about now her switching and turning on her lover. Is it possible, from a legal standpoint, for her to say, in the next appearance, I would rather not have him appear in court with me. I'd rather do it remotely, or he do it remotely. For my safety and for my sanity, I would rather we not be in the same space. Does she have a legal standing to do that? Perhaps to even further this agenda of hers that everything was done against my will?
Now, the thing is, like, the only time that they can actually appear on different dates or something is maybe when you ask for a court for separation of the trials so that they can be kept separate. But if the state allows that to happen, that is going to be detrimental to the state. Because then the one can allege and make all sorts of allegations on one case, and the other one can come, and then both of them can be acquitted. So separation can never happen in this case. You need to keep them together. They just need to keep sufficient security personnel in the court. They can even say, maybe the court can say, okay, you are afraid of him, so you sit right at number 1 and he sits right at number 10.
Yeah.
So the distance between the two of you are sufficient so that he can't harm you, and you don't need to look at him. You can look one way or the other. But for me, it's like this is a strategy that they're using, and it's not completely unfolded yet, and there's still things to come. And I believe she and Thabo discussed this to say that throw me under the bus for your bail application, because if you get bail, you can do certain things for me while you're on bail.
So the criminal saga continues, and
that's how I see it.
Is warped into, it's actually quite scary when you mention it like that, because there were so many other components that were unnecessarily included into this as well, Slee. We've got Katlego Bereng, unfortunately, who was at the center of him getting out of the prison. What are the developments around that particular case, and of course justice for his family?
Now, you would remember that the state, right at the beginning of the arrests, and once we got to, I think, around 6 suspects who had already been arrested, the state made a decision to drop the murder charge, which was in connection with that body that was found in Bester's cell, planted as a decoy. We now know that that body is Katlego Bereng. He disappeared sometime last year. His family had been looking for him for a couple of months now, and were then called by state officials to do DNA tests, and of course it matched, and we found out the identity of that body that was planted in the cell. And of course that's something that has angered not only his family, but many of those who knew him in Bloemfontein, who are now seeking justice, to say that they don't believe the story that they're being sold about how Katlego disappeared or how he ended up dead, because the story is that he collapsed at a taxi rank. He was rushed to one of the government hospitals, and subsequently we now know from the evidence that was brought by the state that Nandipha and the foreign national Zanda Moyo were the ones who claimed his body. And his body then ended up in Bester's cell. So we know that one of the political parties that has been following developments quite closely is Action SA. They have actually opened a case against the state in relation to how Katlego's body was removed from the hospital, and how Nandipha and Zanda Moyo were able to claim that body, saying that that was negligent on the part of the state. And so we, of course, know that his family as well is following developments, and they do believe that more arrests need to be made, but they also want to see some progress around the charges that have been laid regarding Katlego's body and how it ended up in a prison. So we spoke to Action SA during this week's bail proceedings. They are keeping in touch with the Bereng family as well when they can't make it to court, to keep them abreast with developments. Let's take a listen.
The reason why we're here to make sure that we monitor the entire process And we do believe that Dr. Magudumana must not be given bail. She must remain behind bars. Because if you remember very well, she's still accused of being one of the people who make sure that Thabo escape from prison. So we don't believe that she must be outside. She must remain behind bars. And we do believe the entire process, she doesn't respect South African people. She doesn't even respect the family of Katlego, who lost their own child. They were supposed to be here, but unfortunately I spoke with Monica. She clearly says, Patricia, I'm not going to make it. Can you please be there on their behalf? I spoke with the father even yesterday evening. They are not going to be here today. That's why you don't see them in a gallery. But I do believe that let's our justice system do what they're supposed to do. That's all that we are hoping for. Because if she can be given the bail, it's going to be an insult in front of law-abiding citizens of this country.
And Elton, we'll get into that public outrage in a moment, but before we do, Prof, I have to bring you in here because that notion that was alluded to earlier by Elton and then, of course, explained by Slee, with including Katlego Bereng and all the other steps that she took to make sure that this escape happened, could it be that this entire bail application has been orchestrated to continue on in this criminal plot? Does that level of narcissism actually exist?
Oh, yes, it does.
Yeah.
It does. And we're seeing it unfold before our eyes now. Because we're being led by very clever criminal minds to the state. And the sooner the state can finalize this and get the case on, I think the sooner we'll ensure that part of the truth is out. We won't know whether the late Katlego Bereng was murdered deliberately for this, etc. That is left to the investigative authorities. I must give kudos to the forensic people to come back with the DNA so swiftly. We need to show that we've got a system that is humane, but humane also for the victims, and not just for clever lawyers and cleverer criminals to get away with making us look like utter fools out there. The sooner we can have a lid on this, the better it will be.
Yeah, and Elton, I mean, that also speaks to the public outrage, because the idea that this is all part of the big plan, you know, would spew that public outrage. And one wonders, how does then that inform, if at all, a decision or a consideration that would be made by the magistrate in this case?
No, indeed, a magistrate, when they look at bail and to consider now both sides, the state and the defense side of arguments to say, should we grant bail, they should also look at what will the public say or do in regards to bail being granted or not granted. So they need to take that into consideration. But it should not be the overwhelming factor. As I said, bail should not be used as a punitive measure. Bail is just there to show that an accused person will stand his or her trial. That's what the bail inquiry is more or less about, and that you won't commit any further crimes while out on bail. So that's where the inquiry should be centered around. Now, to say that public outrage, then we see 9 of the 12 already got bail. And number one actually is the one that says that was accused of, he opened the gate, took the body in, and actually somehow he must be involved in the setting alight of the body. Now for me, that setting alight of the body, it wasn't done by Zanda Moyo, it wasn't done by Nandipha. It was done by one of the persons either in that dock or yet to be arrested that set the body of Katlego Bereng alight in the cell. And if they get bail, I don't think, yes, we should consider public outrage, but I'm not thinking, and if Nandipha, for whatever reasons, if the judge finds it fit to give her bail, she would be somewhere here in Joburg. Katlego Bereng's body and family was found in Bloemfontein. So people might be there, but there won't be some sort of demonstration like we say the July 21 unrest when former President Zuma was taken. But it should be considered, but I don't think it will play that big a role in the decision to grant bail or not to grant bail. It will play a role, but not that big. The big one is, will you stay in trial? Will you influence witnesses? and will you not endanger or commit further crimes?
Yeah.
That's more or less where the inquiry is centered around.
Tanya, you've also been dubbed the human lie detector, and I'm wondering, as we wrap up our discussion here, based on what you saw unfold in court, whether it be the last week or the previous time when we've spoken, do you reckon that there's any truth to anything that Nandipha or her legal team has put forward here? Or has it all just, as we've been talking about for the last hour or so, been a plot to get out of jail and also just a showing of self-pity, and that's all it is?
So when we look at human lie detection, it's fascinating because when we analyze someone, we call it a baseline. So we look at I can't just judge someone on one interaction. You've got to look at the whole range of things. So when we look at her first appearances in court, she was very demure and hiding her face and calm. And she was displaying very little. This bail application, she was crying, she was shaking her head, she was looking at disbelief at the people. So it's outside of her baseline, which indicates to me she's performing. It's not true. She's performing. It's a game. It's a plan. It's a plan. It's like the professor saying, they are planning something. I think Elton said the same thing. Yeah. They are planning something. I'm not 100% sure if he knew, because she was way too nervous with their first meeting. The anxiety in her body language was really high. So I'm not sure if he 100% knew that she was going to do this. She had too much distancing from him. Now he knows. So we'll see the next court case. It's going to be interesting to watch them.
It definitely will be. And Prof, what about if she doesn't get bail? Someone of her nature, psychopath or narcissist, or whatever it is you choose to call her, what does that do to her psyche? But also, what does the fact that her family is not appearing to support her do for her case, if anything at all?
She will continue playing the victim, very clearly, but she'll bounce back because, make no mistake, this woman is somebody who is fully in control of the situation. She is not going to allow anything to get in the way of her having her own way. And that is what we've got to watch for. She's going to have her own way, come whatever. She's that kind of person.
Yeah. How come she hasn't shown any anger, Prof. Slee? We're going to wrap up with you in a moment. But I want to know why she hasn't shown anger.
She can't, because she's still playing the role of, I'm the victim.
Yes.
I'm the demure. I'm the innocent. All these things that you're throwing at me, I'm not guilty of at all. I should actually be somewhere else. I shouldn't be here at all. But she's been doing this in a serial fashion. She is incapable of any thoughts about other people's health and well-being. And I did say to groups of medical practitioners that maybe we should do some analysis of medical practitioners based on her behavior if she gets convicted, because surely we should not allow persons like this to enter the health profession, because they have the power of life and death over you.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe we should do that for judges as well. I don't know. But given where our society is, a laissez-faire democracy, it is natural to expect the best from who we expect to act in our interest. And do no evil, do no harm is the first and last prescripts of your oath as a medical practitioner.
Yeah.
And nobody can go, unfortunately, if you're a female medical practitioner now, even a male, attractive one, people are going to wonder now, that diagnosis you're giving me, is it a Nandiphaism?
Yeah.
You know, what is it that I'm going to be suffering from? So all those, I think, throw us into a disarray. But much of this has been carefully scripted, and whatever comes, they're going to be a step or two ahead of our legal system. And they have the ability to pay for the best legal mind. They will chop and change legal representatives at a whim in order to get what she wants.
Sure, Slee, that gives us, you the platform to end off the discussion in terms of then what do we see going forward based on that engagement, in that they will probably be 2 steps ahead of everyone throughout this entire case. What are we expecting to happen in the coming days?
Well, we are back in the Bloemfontein Magistrates Court tomorrow, where we are expecting closing arguments in her bail application, and perhaps we may have a decision by tomorrow afternoon as to whether or not she will be released on bail. Mind you, it is her birthday tomorrow, so
isn't that fitting?
Isn't that fitting? So she might be getting an early birthday gift. Who knows? So we are going to be in Bloemfontein. We are expecting court proceedings to start at around 9 a.m. There was an issue around her legal team, surprisingly, in the beginning of their closing arguments last week, disputing the schedule of the bail application. You remember Elton Hart saying in the Schedule 5, the onus is on the applicant to show why the interests of justice permit their release. Her lawyers in their closing arguments saying, well, they believe this may be a Schedule 1 bail application, actually, given that she's facing 16 charges, but only 2 of those 16 are actually Schedule 5 offences. But come the 11th of October, that's the next big appearance where we are expecting all 12 accused back in the dock, including Bester. So that is why I think it will be interesting to have our panel back next month as well, to just kind of unpack what we see happening in court. And what we are expecting there is that the state would have wrapped up their investigations, meaning that we're that much closer to finalizing a trial date.
That would be very interesting, and so we shall have them back in studio indeed, Slee, following developments around that story. Thank you very much, Senior Reporter Silindelo Masikane. You've got language and body expert Tanya Steyn. You've got legal expert Elton Hart, and of course Professor Saths Cooper, who's a psychologist, all joining us in studio, unpacking the Magudumania that we've seen over the last few days or so. Do stay with us on Today. We've got more of the day's top stories coming up.